Have you ever finished a practice session, closed up the piano, and thought, I just practiced for an hour, so why doesn't it feel like I got any better? Well, if you've ever felt that way, you're not alone. In fact, I think this is one of the biggest reasons adults become discouraged. It's because somewhere along the way, we're taught that practicing more automatically leads to better results, right? Practice makes perfect, etc. I don't think that's true. In this video, I'm going to show you the three phases I believe every practice session should have. It's the exact framework I use with my own students, and by the end of this video, you're going to know how to make a 20-minute practice session more effective than 2 hours of unfocused repetition. If you're new here, my name is Alex. This channel is all about helping adults reconnect with music in a way that's creative, expressive, and enjoyable. And if that's the kind of musician you want to become, consider subscribing, because every week we're going to explore more practical ways to learn music as a language and not just memorize pieces. So let's talk about practice a little bit more. Most people don't have a practice problem. They have a practice structure problem. Imagine going to the gym, walking from machine to machine, doing random exercises, and hoping that you're going to get stronger. You'll probably stay busy, you'll definitely make use of the time, but you wouldn't necessarily make more progress. And the same thing happens on the piano. A lot of people sit down, they play through a couple of familiar pieces, they repeat the parts they already know, but they end up making a lot of the same mistakes, and we're still calling it, practice, but to me that's a little bit more like performing, in the practice room. Which I would say is probably more like the final phase of your practice, right? But real practice has to have a purpose and direction. And for me, it happens in 3 distinct phases. So the first phase is probably the opposite of what you would expect. In fact, it's the phase that a lot of people are skipping completely. So here's phase 1 of the 3 phases, right? Whenever I begin practicing, I don't immediately try to play something perfectly. What I do is I go into explorer mode, right? I start exploring the piece. I start asking questions. What key is this in? What's happening harmonically? Can I sing the melody? Can I play it by ear? Can I write some fingerings in here? Can I put some of the rhythms in there, or all of the rhythms and all of the fingerings, and maybe even label the notes? Can I improvise using this idea? Can I write my own ending? This is where curiosity lives when you work with something. Remember what we talked about in the last video? Authentic exploration. So this is where it belongs, because before we organize the information, we need to first kind of lay the groundwork and understand what that is, and program the mind like a computer. So exploration transforms music from something you memorize into something that you actually discover. So, exploration alone isn't enough. Eventually your ideas need to have direction, and that's where phase 2 is going to come in. So phase 2 is basically organization, and that's where the rhythm starts to become more of a priority. This is where most people think that practice begins, but in reality it's the second step. So now that you've explored and you've kind of left no stone unturned, it's time to start organizing that information and putting it together into the dance steps for the dance that your fingers have to do. Break the music down into small sections, play the difficult parts, slow everything down, decide what today's goal is. That's probably one of the biggest things. Maybe you're only working on 4 measures today, but that's totally okay. In fact, I think that's often better than trying to play the whole thing, because clarity beats quantity and quality beats quantity. So when every measure has a purpose and every minute has a purpose, practice becomes much less overwhelming, because you can kind of just let all those other things fall by the wayside. Now comes the phase that people think is the entire practice session maybe, which is that it's the final piece. So now and only now do we do the polishing. Repeat with intention, right? This after you've done all these other things in the first 2 phases. Listen really carefully, record yourself, notice what's improved, notice what feels awkward, what you'd like to refine, make one small adjustment, play more musically here, play more emotionally there, less pedal here, more there, right? Then try again. Refining isn't mindless repetition, it's very thoughtful repetition. So every repetition should answer a question. Every repetition should solve a problem. If you're simply playing something over and over, hoping it gets better, you're leaving your progress up to chance. Notice something interesting. None of these phases required you to practice for hours, right? They just required you to change how you're thinking it differently. Explore, organize, refine. That's a very different experience from simply sitting down and hoping that time alone is going to make you better. Because time doesn't create progress, purpose does. One of my students, Rita, she came back to me after almost 50 years away. Early on, when we started exploring stuff, she thought practicing meant repeating difficult passages over and over again, and that was the only part of it, right? So instead, we slowed everything down, we explored the music, we took the pressure off, and we addressed the emotional side of things. We organized the tiny goals, we refined one idea at a time. And almost immediately, practice became less frustrating and more enjoyable for her. Ironically, once she stopped trying to rush to get that finished result, her progress actually sped up. So if you've been measuring your practice by minutes, I would encourage you to start measuring it differently. Ask yourself, did I discover something today? Did I understand something more deeply today? Did I solve a musical problem? Did I become a little more independent? Because that's the kind of practice that lasts, that stays in your memory. That's the kind of practice that's going to build your confidence long term. And ultimately, that's the kind of practice that helps adults fall in love with music again. So now that you know how to structure this practice session in 3 phases, there's one question that I get almost more than any other question during lessons, which is, well, what should I actually practice first, right? And it's really not entire pieces, right? And not scales or something, right? The actual musical skills that make everything else easier. That's exactly what we're going to cover in the next video. So I'll see you there. Stay tuned.